The Nets are headed to a new era of a rebuild, and that means it's a new time to look at all of the money coming off the books, money that could be coming on the books. We're going to get into it all with Yossi Gozlan here in a second, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, the tanking Brooklyn Nets, every single day. No Adam Armbrecht on the show today. That's okay. Massive upgrade when it comes to talking money. We're here with Yossi Gozlan, owner of CapSheets.com. You've probably seen him over on Hoops Hype before. Follow him on Yossi Gozlan over on Twitter, where the account is really absolutely blowing up because everyone wants to talk about NBA money, probably more than they want to talk about what's actually happened on the court. Yossi, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. Finally starting to cool down this time of year. And yourself?
Yeah, we're trying to cool down. Not doing it all that successfully here in Jersey, but that's just the way it goes. It's okay because sometimes the NBA offseason is at times I think sometimes there's probably a group of fans out there that probably enjoy the NBA offseason more than they might even enjoy the NBA in season. And when you're talking about off season, really where a lot of this starts is like, teams making moves, teams having money coming in, teams having money going out. And that becomes, and especially too, with where like second apron stuff seems to be as popular as, some player talk. Before we even just get into the Nets, I mean, Yossi's got expert level background in when it comes to just cap maneuvering and just sort of what teams are doing on a daily basis. Have you thought that this season from a just sort of inflow outflow standpoint has been different than other off seasons because of like the apron, like teams making more moves that are just different in the macro sense? Like, do you feel like this off season is different than other ones you've sort of covered in the past?
I think this one's a little different in recent years, not so much because the aprons. I think more so that the cap only went up 3%. And when that happens, well, the luxury tax line barely goes up, and all those other thresholds that team don't want to pass, those are barely increasing as well. And the rate of existing contracts, those are increasing faster than all those thresholds. So I think teams are kind of that's one thing. So now they're kind of trying to be more careful this year, but in the long run, it really shouldn't matter because the cap's going to keep going up 10% over the next few years. So that's going to outpace all these different existing contracts and how they're supposed to grow. So I kind of feel like maybe teams are using all the second apron stuff or all that maybe in negotiations to, get their, explain their case to whoever they're negotiating with. But I would think that next year, once the cap's going up again a little more, and I think everyone starts to understand how the system works even better, then I think it'll be more like in recent years where there should be more players getting properly paid.
It seems like I've heard like their pushback, the pushback against it now is like it's being used sort of as like a boogeyman more than anything else. And I saw that posited the other day, and I was like, maybe that is true. It's like might be a nice little reminder to fans, like, hey, we don't want to just go unlimited open checkbook from here till infinity on some of these contracts, and if we can guise it under these new CBA rules, that might not be the worst thing. When we're talking about the Nets. Nets obviously in a period of major transition here, i.e. tanking in a time when a lot of other teams are headed toward, signing guys in free agency and contracts. The Nets are clearly going a different way, just on a high level. I want to talk the Nic Claxton contract here in a second, because I think that's like sort of first and foremost in a lot of fans' minds, especially with the way that the Nets structured it. But where, when you look at the Nets here, like in sort of like the moving off of the Bridges piece and moving into an era of just having probably a lot of money opening up over the next couple of years. Do you think they're like in a good position, advantageous position, like with the way the league is shaping up, or like gone the days where, sometimes teams will just unload massive money in order to get off like, just major headache contracts? Like, do you think the Nets are positioned well just on a macro level?
Yeah, I think the Nets are one of the most well-positioned teams in the league, like definitely top 5 when you think about teams like OKC. They have their best position for now and in the future, and then you've got teams like Brooklyn, Utah, Just all these teams with these surplus of first round picks, the Spurs. I think the Nets are extremely well positioned. They have about, I think, 15 first round picks over the next 7 drafts. And they've got, I want to say, 4 in next year's draft. Now, only their own supposed to be super valuable. They've got one by the Bucks, Knicks, and Thunder, so those probably won't be too high. But if something happens from one of those teams, then they're in a good spot. And well, the Thunder one's a swap, so it could be a different team. But so they've got that going on, and they're gonna have a lot of cap space next summer. Not necessarily to pursue players, but they can use that to accumulate more assets, take more money back with more picks attached. And so I think they're in a pretty awesome position. I wouldn't be surprised if after these next 2 drafts, they might be in a position to just start positioning themselves to be more competitive shortly after. If they draft 1 or 2 good players and they do some good trades to get some good young players that all fit, I don't see why this can't be a relatively short rebuild, especially with all these assets and cap flexibility they have.
Yeah, I think that's the dream scenario for a lot of Nets fans, is that like the rebuild won't be long and painful, that it'll be sort of short and fruitful. These things sometimes are at the mercy of sort of how you draft, obviously, but we kind of share the sentiment that you threw out there in terms of just like sort of, at least for now, the positioning seems prime. We'll see how the drafts work out. We'll see where they end up getting slotted after a season of just probably some pain on the court, but that's just going to be the way it is. When it comes to Nic Claxton, I mean, though they did make one big move here. They did sign Nic Claxton to a long-term deal, and it was a $25 million, excuse me, it was $100 million basically over 4 years. But the way it was structured is declining money. And so it goes, just for the listeners out there that hadn't heard this, because we had actually kind of held some of the Claxton stuff to like knowing that Yossi was coming on here, but 27.5 the first year, then down to 25.3, 23.1 in 26-27, and then down to 20.9, so just under 21 in the 4th year of the contract. What's your initial thought when you see that contract, the way it's structured, the declining money? Like, a good move by the Nets here, like sort of a well-planned move to have that money going down over the course of the 4-year contract?
I think it's a great move. I knew he was going to get more than a lot of what some other centers in his tier were getting. Like a lot of guys like Clint Capella, Jakob Poeltl, Vucevic are all making like $20 million a year, and I expect the Claxton to break above that. He definitely got a lot more than that at $25 million annually, but I think that's great that the Nets structured it a complete descending, because one, then you are able to, if they keep Claxton, then they'll be in a much better position to, once they have that next good Nets team ready. If he's there, then the descending structure gives them better flexibility to put better pieces around him. And on the other hand, he's probably going to be a trade candidate when we get to January, February, just because, just where the state of the Nets right now. And you hear Cam Johnson's name and Dorian Finney-Smith's name. I'm sure we'll hear the same for Nic Claxton, although he's still pretty young. So and he's on a great contract, so there's no big pressure to move him. But I'm sure there will be rumors just because of the Nets situation. So because of it's ascending, that's also a great value. When the cap increases, it's only going to be better. And I think it's a pretty great contract, and just given how little money they really have to spend on actual players. Other than the only other ones coming up are Cam Thomas and Day'Ron Sharpe potentially. We'll see what happens there, but very little money to spend in the long run. Definitely front loaded as much as possible, and it'll probably be extendable in the future, even though it gets down to like 21 million. So I think they'll be able to get it like a max. Let's say he's playing at a super high level by the time you're in that last year. So then you could extend off of that to like 30 million. So if he's playing at that level, I don't know what percentage of the cap is going to be, but I feel like that should be enough to potentially extend off of in the future.
All right, got more to talk about here with Yossi, including the aforementioned Cam Thomas and where that deal could possibly look like as he's up for an extension going forward here. We'll get into that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, if you're buying tickets, you want it to be easy. You don't have $25 million to spend like Nic Claxton over there when you're buying tickets. You can maybe a little bit more on a budget. This is where Game Time can come in and really help you going, especially when it comes to MLB tickets. I mean, I couldn't even believe I was over on Game Time earlier and saw some of the prices for the Mets. I mean, just you're never gonna believe this. Going into this weekend, $6, $4, $10, $8. These are just some of the deals you're getting on some of these Mets tickets over on Game Time. And what else you're getting on Game Time is the best place to buy tickets. You're gonna get flash deals, you're gonna get last minute deals, you're gonna get zone deals, you're gonna get all in pricing, you're gonna get seat views, so you're gonna know exactly what you're gonna see when you sit down. Lowest price guarantee. They got Game Time ticket coverage as well. It's all there for you over on Game Time. They got sports, comedy, theater. Game Time's got you covered. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, so Cam Thomas, without even getting into like sort of like his future as a player and stuff like that, although we could probably go there if you wanted to. Cam Thomas is the kind of guy I don't even want to call polarizing at this point, because now they just kind of they barely even have guys on the team who can like, functionally dribble the ball. So Cam, from that standpoint, is in a pretty good place with this team. But when it comes to like sort of outlook future for him and extension possibilities and what next contracts could look like and sort of maybe just like value around the league, he's probably going to, I suspect he's going to be the kind of guy that after because I believe it's a team option in 25, 26. Where do you see like a possible Cam Thomas extension going? Do you think the Nets will do it? Like, what could the numbers look like? This one has always been sort of hard for me, and I think us to sort of wrap our head around what Cam Thomas's value is and what these contracts could look like for him. I don't know if you have thoughts on sort of like what the future could look like for him in a Nets uniform or possibly somewhere else.
So he'll be restricted free agent after the season. If they don't extend him, they can extend him between now and the start of the regular season. And I get the feeling that they're not going to extend him or Day'Ron Sharpe, just because they want to preserve their cap space. So I think they'd like to keep him, but if they hold off on extending him, like the Sixers did with Tyrese Maxey, they'll just have way more cap space next summer. And maybe they just want to see a little more out of those guys before they lock him into a new deal. So as far as Cam Thomas, I would think he might be looking at, like, when you compare him to guys like Jordan Clarkson, Norman Powell, some like high-end backup guard types that score. They're making like 18 to 20 mil, so maybe he makes a little more than that with the cap rising just to adjust for the inflation. So I could see him getting something like a little over $20 million a year, where even if he doesn't become a full-time starter, if he's scoring at a high level, that's still a pretty good contract.
Yeah, so it's funny. It's funny when you say that, because I guarantee you over on YouTube, you're going to see in our comments, you don't feel like you need to read them, but you comparing him to guys like Jordan Clarkson and Norman Powell will have a certain segment. If you live in the Nets streets, there's a certain fan that just absolutely thinks Cam Thomas is many, many levels above the guys you just mentioned. I'm not going to push back on that. I'm just saying that I know there's a segment of fan that definitely thinks differently. Do you think like a guy like him that, you mentioned the Tyrese Maxey contract where they sort of held off, it seemed like a mutually beneficial decision for them to both kind of like agree that was going to be the case. And obviously also he just kind of plays out of his mind too, sort of in that waiting period, and then gets the full, like, I guess the full bag. Do you think Cam Thomas, like when you say like you don't think they're going to offer the extension, or you think the extension will be in that range, is that based on sort of just like where you believe the league probably views him? Because or is there like a world where, because the Nets are tanking this year and because they probably have very, very little in the way of offensive production, like there's a world where his stats could just look way better, but it might not be the best testing ground because of where the team is. I don't know if I'm phrasing this correctly, but like, is there a world where the sides could become maybe embroiled because like the stats maybe just look better than like maybe the contract would end up maybe possibly being that the Nets could offer.
So the first thing you're saying, if holding off in the extension, like if you're asking like do they give him a better contract or something afterward? Like with Tyrese Maxey, I think he was always going to get a max contract. He was just that good. So with Cam Thomas, he's not a max player. So, and usually these types of rookie scale extensions, like the max ones get done pretty early, and then all the sub max players, those get done like pretty close to the start of the opening night, because that's when everyone shows their cards, and that's when you compromise to something they like. So I guess it just at the same time, I don't think they necessarily don't want to extend him. I think if he agrees to a rate that they like right now, then I'm sure they just take it. I don't know what that number is, but maybe I'm guessing there's a good chance that it'll probably be less than what he's probably asking for, in which case they'll say, okay, then play for it. And let's see, if you improve, then would gladly pay you your asking price. So I think as far as I think that's kind of where it is, just because he's a sub-max player right now. That's just generally how these go with players like that. And, we'll just see. I think there's a very good chance it goes to restricted free agency.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Like I said, I was more like it's more kind of paying lip service to a certain level of fan which I know are for many of our listeners that feel like that hear Cam Thomas and Max and just put them two together and think that he's probably is that guy. A couple other guys that let's go ahead.
Last point, like you're asking about the stats, like he's gonna be, I'm guessing, the first option now, unless they bring in anyone else that's better than him offensively. So the thing on the other side is, well, okay, maybe he scores he does too well that now he's gonna or like the fear is that what if he scores so much, what if he plays so well that he's gonna get a lot more than we were hoping to pay for. Maybe we're willing to pay him a little more now so he to secure him on something before he blows up, if they do believe in him that much.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I get that these are always sort of like tricky situations the teams are in, especially where the Nets are now, because it doesn't make sense to overpay for anybody really at this point, even though they do have, an inordinate amount of cap space going into next season. They do have a couple other guys still on the books here in Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. How do you see those? Do you think there's still a market for those guys? Do you think those guys, the contracts that they're on, I mean, there's Nets fans and maybe us included here that kind of want these guys gone yesterday, mostly because they're just like, we're in full asset rebuild mode. Where do you see their contracts in the greater NBA landscape in Cam Johnson and DFS as having value for other teams at this point? Like, do you think there's still going to be a market for these guys, or is Sean Marks, and he's done this in the past, like held on a little too long to some of these like aging veterans? Although this case does feel a little differently now with these two dudes.
I think there's absolutely a market for both these guys. So with Cam Johnson first, there's definitely a demand for him. Yeah, he didn't play. He kind of declined last year, but also just given the team circumstances, not a great situation for a lot of players. But now he'll be like the one, if Cam Thomas is 1A, he's kind of like 1B offensively in terms of an option. So the Nets can think, okay, well, now we can give him more shots. Now he can really play. Maybe he could boost his value. He's still, he was a pretty old rookie when he came out, but like relatively speaking, still like not an old player. So I think and it's a declining salary as well, the contract structure. So I think it's a good contract. And if he plays closer to before he came to Brooklyn, I think that there will be a stronger market and they should be able to get something for him. So I don't think there's a rush to move him, especially because there's 3 more years left on this deal. On the other hand, I think with Dorian Finney-Smith, there's probably more urgency to move him, because I don't think I think the opposite could happen with him, where if he plays with this team, maybe his value goes down because there's just not much help for him. There's not enough playmaking, not enough stuff to really help, the help maximize his skill set and like make him look good. So I do think there is some downside to keeping him and playing him on this, what's supposed to be a bad Nets team. maybe they try to just move him now. Maybe you don't get like a first round pick or something like that, but he's got the player option next year, so time's running up on that deal. I think if I had to guess, he probably gets moved first for some of those reasons I outlined.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think we've stressed that too a little bit, that it may like I thought there was probably a case at least Cam Johnson goes into the season on the team. Um, we've basically just kind of saying a lot of the same stuff that we said up into this podcast. Going into a guy that a lot of Nets fans do not really want to hear about very often, but whose contract takes up a massive amount of the current salary cap, is Ben Simmons. Now, reports aside that he's coming into the season at 100%, which just came out via, I believe, Brian Lewis a couple hours ago. So wash, rinse, repeat on Ben Simmons is 100% coming into the season. Whoever knows what's going to happen like 5 games in. He's sitting on the books right now at $40 million. It's 40 and change. It's the last year of the contract. Where do you think of the options of tradable contract under any circumstances, buyout? I have my own opinion to the buyout, but I don't want to say it before I hear what you say, or just sort of playing through the contract. Forget the part where like he comes back and resigns. What do you see happening with this contract this year? Like, do you see it goes all the way through on the books? Do you think the buyout is even a possibility? Or do you think there's like any appetite at all from another team to want to trade this? It's like the Simmons thing it's only really relevant at this point just simply because of how much money he makes.
So I don't think anyone's trading for Ben Simmons, the player, but just in terms of his expiring contract, it's a good vehicle to do certain things. So I think his contract is more movable in the sense of helping another team get off some bad long-term money. So they can go ahead. The Nets can do something with their cap space next summer where they take back some bad money in picks. But if they can get a good package now where they're taking back salaries beyond this current season, and they get some good value where they have to send out Simmons' expiring contract, then I'm sure they're going to seriously consider it. They're not going to trade his. I don't think they're going to trade him for players that are going to help them win now, unless they're like younger players that can fit in the long term. So just in that sense, that's what his contract's going to be useful for. And if he's still on the team by the end of the season, you might think maybe he does get bought out, and if there is a team that wants to join him. But otherwise, they could just keep him, keep those bird rights in case they need to construct some like complicated sign and trades next summer. I mean, I would anticipate that, but I most likely just either they trade him for they get some good assets back for some worse salaries, or they just hold on to him or potentially buy him out. I don't think there's too much exciting stuff to happen with that situation.
And we've always kind of just cautioned folks about like thinking that the buyout's going to happen, mostly because the player has to agree to the buyout, and most times the buyout's just let for less money than you would have gotten paid unless you knew you were going to land somewhere else. And it's like you said at the end, it's so hard to imagine.
So I think he'd have to give up a lot of money. Like, let's say he wants to get bought out before the season started, because they're already very close to the luxury tax line. They're like 8.1 million. So they have all these trade exceptions that they can theoretically use to take bad money on now, but they're so close to the tax that they can't really do it. They can't really do that stuff. So if Ben Simmons was willing to agree to like a pretty big buyout where they free up more flexibility, I think they'd agree to that. But even then, like, who's offering him more than a minimum salary at this point? So why would he give up more than that? And that's not really doing anything for the Nets. You might as well hold on to that salary for a trade.
Yeah, we've always said, like, with the buyouts, it takes 2 to tango. Like, a team could want to buy a guy out, but like the guys kind of want to get bought out. Like, and I don't know many people just in my regular life that are willing to just give money back in the hopes of going and finding something else once the contract's already in the books. Like, it doesn't really make sense. No, so we're pretty much with you on all that stuff. When it comes to just real quick, Trendon Watford did sign as a restricted free agent, making him, I believe, an unrestricted free agent going into next summer. Do you have any quick thoughts on sort of that deal, which ended up being for, I think, two and change on the Trendon Watford deal? They had tendered him a qualifying offer. I guess nothing materialized out there on the open market. He took it, and now he's going to end up playing out the season. What are like, is there any wrinkles that could kind of happen with him, especially if he were to like, let's say, play well this season, which, because I do think there's going to be a chance for him just because of the way the current roster is constructed. I actually do think there's going to be a decent amount of playing time for a guy like Watford, who's coming back on a really, really cheap 1-year contract.
So I don't really know much about Trenton Watford's game, but two things. One, if he plays out the year with the Nets and he just enters free agency next year and he plays really well, they'll be able to pay him like respectfully because they'll have his early bird rights. They'll be able to pay him whatever it is that he would probably command on the open market. Now, the only other thing is that really impacts things is when you accept your qualifying offer, you can't, you have veto rights on a trade for the rest of the season. So just something that I don't really think it's going to impact the Nets. He's only making 2.7 million, so I'm sure they could come up with that. If they need to send that equivalent of salary, they could come up with it another way. But that's kind of it. I don't think it really makes any. I don't think it has any consequential effects on the Nets this season.
Yeah, I do feel like if I were to make a guess on him, just like knowing his game a little bit, my guess is that like he plays himself into a bigger contract simply because he's just going to have so much on court time, and they just are really so devoid of anybody right now that can even like sort of even play make a little bit, and he can do it just enough, even though it doesn't look always super pretty all the time. Final thoughts here. Nets going into next season. Do you see them? We talked about it a little bit at the top, but just to kind of close things out, inordinate amount of cap space going into next season. When you think about this team, when you think about like sort of the next couple of years down the line, do you think that like they'll be happy with the move to get off Bridges now into this like sort of new era of basketball? Like, if we're just looking at this team through the lens of getting off the Bridges contract, which is a good contract, getting off the Bridges contract to bring in all those pieces and then just sort of open up all this cap space into what's going to be sort of maybe a generational draft also. Do you think they ultimately made the right move sort of on like a macro NBA level to start this timeline now instead of maybe waiting for like a Giannis to ask out and hope that you could outbid the other teams? Like, do you think that ultimately was the correct move for them? Just sort of to reset the timeline now?
Without a doubt, because they got for him what the type of return that all NBA players go for. And he's never even made an all-star team. Like Mikal Bridges is a great player. He's going to be like a fantastic addition to the Knicks. But just given where the Nets were, I think it was extremely smart to do exactly what they did with New York and Houston to position themselves to just bottom out and get all these extra picks. Like when you look at the history of trades where a player goes out for so many picks, like 4 unprotected firsts and plus, like it almost historically doesn't work out well for the team taking that really good player. So I think the Nets are like without a doubt that this was the right move to make. And they structured it in a way with that, like reeling in that Houston trade as well, which is brilliant. And they, like I said, I think they can be in a position to rebuild pretty quick. And like kind of like you look at what happened with the Nets in the last rebuild, they were in an even worse position. They like unlike now, they didn't have their picks back. They couldn't get him back. They were losing Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, yet they still were able to draft well enough in the margins and sign, get guys like Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, and sign guys out of nowhere like Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie to put together a deep enough team that once they had the cap space, it enticed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I don't see why that can't happen again. Like, obviously, the league has changed in the sense that free agency doesn't quite work that way anymore. But why can't a couple of all-stars in the future look at the net situation and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe I want to get traded there. I don't see why not.
All right, you're saying everything Nets fans want to hear, buddy. So this is why we had you on here. You're gonna just talk about things in the positive light heading into this the rebuild, which could be painful at times. A lot of losses going to be on the ledger, but that's okay. When the money works, and that's why we brought Yossi Gozlan on here. Yossi, tell everyone where they can find you here.
Guys can find me on Twitter at Yossi Gozlan, my YouTube page, Yossi Gozlan NBA. And if you want to see up-to-date salary cap data as moves happen, capsheets.com.
And as a URL guy, when I saw that you got capsheets.com, I was like, oh, that's I was very, very jealous. I always like when I see a very good, clean URL that's very, very easy to remember. If you would need to look at money stuff, like Yossi said, go follow my or go over to capsheets.com. Great follow on Twitter, and the YouTube channel is an absolute banger when it comes to just breaking down every single team and their money. We get to this part of the show to remind you to subscribe to this YouTube, Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We always get to this end of the podcast where Adam usually gives us one of the all-time great American poets, but in this case, we'll just say Yossi Gozlan, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.